How many of you have watched a movie and maybe the day after or the week after, you're still thinking about the movie and you still see this scene in your head? You can still see a part of the movie, or you still remember a part of the movie that just it sticks with you. Does that happen to anyone else? All right. Well, that's kind of the crux of my project, because I want to tell you a little bit about these three directors that I studied, what I did with the information that I learned, and then how you guys can figure out what makes those scenes tick in as short a time as possible. So let's jump into these three directors. I specifically chose comedy directors, and because I wanted to make a comedy movie, or a comedy short film. So these three directors each have very, very different visual styles, and they each use different techniques to get their laughs, to make you remember their scenes. And these two directors in particular, Wright and Tarantino, use this sort of over-the-top, exaggerated style, this really sort of saturated, slapsticky, you're watching a movie style, and the Coen brothers use a very, very cold, a very dry sense of humor to achieve that same end goal. After learning about these three directors and watching a lot of their movies, I started making a movie of my own. So this is a over-the-head diagram of the first act. I broke it up into sort of artificial acts of the short film. And we can follow the characters as they move around in each of these different points in the script. This is a really critical part of the planning process of making a movie, because once you figured out how the characters are going to move, you can figure out how you're going to set up your camera angles to get the same or similar effects to what those directors achieved. So, for example, you might notice that this phone here, this character runs over to the table to pick up the phone slides across the floor. Well, how do you make that image stick in someone's head? If your name is Edgar Wright, what you might do is a super close-up and a super slow-mo motion of that phone falling to the floor as it's overly dramatized, right? It's not a huge moment in that scene, but to the camera, it looks like it's the end of the world. It's the pinnacle of power. If you're one of the Coen brothers, maybe you watch the character nonchalantly walk over to the table, pick up the phone and drop it, and then these two characters just sort of stare at the phone on the floor for about 5 seconds, and then the scene continues. Or if you are Tarantino, you might start on the character's eyes or feet, and you watch their feet run really quickly across the floor, and then you see a zoom up on the character's eyes as they reach for the phone, and then you don't see what happens next. You just hear the whoosh as the phone slides across the floor. So these are each different techniques used by directors to achieve their visual styles, and that's where I started off. Now, how I use these styles is a mystery for now. But this idea of using the camera movement to tell a story is called visual subtext, and it's used in lots and lots of different ways in different movies across genres. So not just in comedy, but in all sorts of different things. And there are plenty of ways that this visual subtext can be used, but for a quick demonstration of what to look for next time you're watching a movie and you're thinking about why that scene had such a big impact on you, you can look at how the camera was angled. Was it above or below the character? And how does that show power in a character? You can look at how it shows the relationship between two characters. Two people looking in the same direction are going to show a much tighter bond than two people facing each other in different heights. And you can look at how the camera's placed, what the camera's placed says about their emotions. How does this character's looking in profile tell you that he's, thinking about the task at hand rather than stopping and puzzling over something? So those are some of the things that you can synthesize and think about next time you're watching a movie. But if anyone has any questions, now. Yeah.
If you're planning on making a comedy, right? Why did you choose 3 directors who are not? They certainly have comedic elements in their films, but they're not necessarily known as comedic directors.
Well, of the directors, Edgar Wright and the Coen brothers are both known for comedy movies. Tarantino is a little bit up to debate. Some people would argue that he's sort of an action director. But in every interview with Tarantino, he argues that he's a comedy director and that his comedy is just a very dark form of comedy. That if you've seen Kill Bill, there's a scene where the character's arm gets chopped off and they go flailing and yelling and screaming like a maniac. And it's exaggerated and over the top and intentionally taken to a degree that is supposed to be funny, even if it's, maybe doesn't strike a chord with it's funny. So I want to leave you with this. Cameras and movies can have a huge impact on the way that we perceive the world and the way we perceive other people. And it's important to try and this visual subtext without intentionally learning about it, or unless you are intentionally looking for it, can sneak up on you and can tell you something that you may not necessarily realizing that you're understanding. And so it's important to sort of actively watch movies, to look for what the camera's telling you and not just what the actors are telling you.